can take you the many different ways. One direction takes you years, another takes you days.
Journeys take us to places known, unknown, sometimes to the center of who we are, sometimes nowhere in particular, yet always somewhere, as there is no such thing as a wasted journey. Sitting across me was a middle-aged, wiry and athletic man, deeply engrossed in a book. Not bookish really, more a person who loves his feet and knows how to use them. I've strong instincts. He looked up, we smiled and got talking.
Hi there, I'm Rajat and I'm from Delhi.
Hi. I'm named after him. Kim. That book you're reading by Rudyard Kipling? Kim Singh. From Darjeeling.
Have you read this book?
Of course, many times. I know it like the back of my hand.
Well, since you're from Darjeeling, have you seen this, have you seen Lhasa Villa?
Ah, that old dilapidated shack. What about it?
Well, it's because that's the house of Sarat Chandra Das, one of the characters that's been outlined in this book, Hari Chandra Mukherjee. He's one of the well-known Pundits.
Really? My God, I didn't know that. Hey, tell me more.
Well, Sarat Chandra Das was actually a scholar. He was the headmaster of one of the schools in Darjeeling. So he was a Bengali gentleman. He had fairly oriental features.
Rajat Banerjee is Vice President Corporate Affairs, Amway, an avid traveler, mountaineer, marathon runner. So my instincts were spot on. But as we talked, I realized how little I really knew. I had read the book, but didn't know that the story of Kipling's little boy Kim, caught up in the great game, had a historical basis.
Sarat Chandra Das was not the only Indian to travel into then foreign lands. He knew a fair amount of Buddhist knowledge and things like that. He traveled to quite a few monasteries. He spent some time there, came back with a lot of information, about 200 books and scriptures that had gone probably from India into Tibet hundreds of thousands of years ago. He brought them back. There were quite a few such explorers, they are known as Pundits, and if you want to know more about this, I think it'll be a good idea if you accompany me to Dehradun, where something interesting is going to happen over the next few days.
And so started my quest. Who were these Pundits? What was the Great Game? And what was connecting British India, Russia, Tibet, Nepal? Rajat took me back in time.
If you look at the late 19th century, the lands north of India, that is, if you look at Tibet, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look at present day beyond Kashmir, those were very uncharted territories in terms of mapping. The map was a complete blank in that area, and they were very dangerous places. So what they did was they used existing traders and existing, religious travelers. They trained them on how to measure distances, how to gauge altitudes, how to make secret notes and hide them in secret places. So it was really the early days of espionage, how very common people, unsophisticated in their methods, were trained. And what we understand today is that they were almost 99% accurate. So 1% human, and you can't even call it error, because at that time in those difficult conditions, what they did was beyond heroic.
Company! Forward! March!
Things studied in tedious history classes at school suddenly took on interesting contours. Battle of Plassey, Robert Clive, Warren Hastings, all came to life. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British had established dominion control over this vast land called India. Coming from a small island, they were overwhelmed by the size and varied topography of this land under their control. 10 years later, in 1767, they established the Survey of India. Interestingly, 63 years before the famous Royal Geographic Society's establishment in London. Survey of India undertook the mapping of India from Kanyakumari in the south to Kashmir in the north, and from Myanmar in the east to borders of Iran in the west, which were the broad contours of our country at that time. The first map of Hindustan was published by 1802. Around this time, the British were afflicted by a very strange disease, Russophobia. Tsarist Russia was in an expansionist mood, and the English had no idea how far away the Russians were from India. Their greatest fear was of Calcutta, their capital, being cut off from the rest of the country by the Russians. And so began the great game. British official maps of the middle of 19th century showed Tibet as one huge white blank, as if covered in snow. But with the fear of Russian advancement across Central Asia, accurate mapping of this northern blank space became imperative. Tibet was the forbidden land. The Tibetans were extremely possessive of their seclusion, sometimes violently so. The work had to be done in secret, and disguises would have to be resorted to. No Westerner could enter and conduct surveys. So, what was the solution? Captain Thomas George Montgomery, a Royal Engineers officer attached to Survey of India, hit upon a brilliant idea. With the Beatles' George Harrison's never-recorded song Dehradun playing in my mind, I break my journey and step off the train at Dehradun. The Survey of India campus in Dehradun is spread over acres. I walk in through gate number 2, down an avenue lined by majestic silver oaks, red cedar and pines, planted there to keep the grounds shaded, so the survey personnel could work in comfort outdoors under the Indian summer sun. Standing at the door was Mr. Arun Kumar, who is the museum and library in charge and an enthusiastic talker.
What is the map? Map is the presentation of globe on the plain paper. Without knowing the curvature of earth, we cannot plot accurate map on plain paper. So that work, knowing the curvature of earth, was started by William Lambton in 1802. The longitude of 78 degree passing from Kanyakumari to Mussoorie. If he succeeded to measure that longitude, then the curvature of earth can be deduced.
Inside the old colonial heritage building is the museum. Entering, one comes face to face with portraits of the surveyors general, including the most famous George Everest. But what caught my eye were 3 portraits of humble Mongoloid faces, possibly from the northeast, maybe Nepalese or Tibetans. Smiling, Arun Kumar said, "These are the famous Pundits, Pandit Nain Singh, Pandit Kishan Singh, and Kinthup." Finally, I was meeting the central characters of this story.
Montgomery identified Nain Singh, who was a village teacher. Clearly, he was educated and he was acclimatized to the high mountains as the person to do his job. So Nain Singh, along with his cousin Mani Singh, was set up to go across the passes to Tibet. Initially, they went as horse traders, but this mission failed because at that time smallpox had broken out in Tibet, and the horse traders from India and other places were banned from coming in. So Montgomery had to look for another way.
Dr. Manushi Lahiri, an elegant, attractive lady, author of many geographical books on mapping, was introduced by my hotel manager on hearing about my visit to the Survey of India campus. She was staying at the hotel and was the perfect dinner companion, wearing an exquisite emerald ring whose shine was matched by that in her eyes as she talked. Historical cartography is her passion, she said.
Captain Thomas George Montgomery came up with the idea of sending Indian surveyors to Tibet to collect information that could be documented and introduced into maps. He had a certain set of requirements for the people who would do this job. They needed to look like local people so that they could mix with the local population without being identified as foreigners. They needed to be intelligent and sharp, aware of some of the basic principles of survey to collect information, and they should be acclimatized to the high altitudes of the Tibetan plateau and the Himalayan mountain ranges and passes.
No wonder, even in the book, Kim found Kipling's Hari Chandra Mukherjee stupid looking. A man who has a price on his head as proof of his excellent, risky spy activities.
Montgomery felt that instead of sending Nain Singh and Mani Singh as traders, perhaps he could send them as men of religion. That would have the added advantage that the local people would respect them and not trouble them too much. They could be seen as saying their prayers while moving their lips, whereas at that point in time they would probably be counting their steps. Similarly, while they counted their steps on the beads, people would think they were saying their prayers. Finally, the men also could hide their small instruments in their clothes and amongst their baggage without any suspicion.
Earlier in the day, on the grounds of the campus, Arun had introduced me to the Nainital-based historian Dr. Shekhar Pathak, who, along with his wife, activist and academic Uma Bhatt, had written an authoritative book on Pandit Nain Singh, Asia Ki Peeth Par. I asked Dr. Pathak how was the hillman recruited for this very specialized task.
In 1856, when he was going in some trade connection to Bageshwar, he was told that some German brothers known as Schlagentweit brothers, Mr. Robert, Mr. Hermann, Mr. Adolf, they are coming to Himalayas, to their area for surveying, and his cousin Mani Singh was also appointed as one of the helpers to this group. In 1856 February, he joined Schlagentweit brothers group in Milam.
Well, the men had been zeroed in on, but they were simple rural folk, and survey was a very specialized technical job, involving measuring distances, determining altitudes, observing topography, all with the help of using very specialized instruments, the sextant, the theodolites, compasses, and so many others. They could be trained. After all, most of them were teachers, and hence the title Pundit. But carrying these cumbersome instruments openly was not an option. some other way had to be found. Dr. Manushi Lahiri had the answer.
First of all, you need to know the actual position of a place so you can record it in a map later on. How do you do this without instruments? Traditionally, this was done at night by taking astronomical measurements of the stars. So these were people who were trained in locating places by studying the night sky. The second thing was, how do you find the altitude of a place? We know that temperature falls with rise in altitude. So they were given thermometers, and the readings from the thermometers indicated the elevation of the place. And the third thing that you need to do, very basically, once you know the altitude and the position of a place, also you need to know the distance between the places. For this purpose, they were taught to walk in a manner in which for every 2 steps, you covered 33 inches. How did you cover these 33 inches? You did it by taking 2 steps. The right foot and the left foot together would make 33 inches. The fact is, this data on distances was being collected to create maps, that whether they were going uphill or downhill or on flat land, they meticulously counted the number of steps they took, and they ensured that the distance they covered in those steps were constant. Besides recording distance between places, their position by the night sky, and the altitude through the thermometer, these people were great observers of the terrain around, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes. They also were great observers of climate. For the purpose of mapping, you not only need positions and distances, you also need these other bits of information so that you get in one view on a map a comprehensive picture of the land.
The great journeys began, and Shekhar Pathak gave me a vivid description of Nain Singh's 4 journeys. I'd love to share one with you.
In January 1865, they started their journey from Dehradun. After reaching in March 65 to Kathmandu, then they crossed over Himalayas. They reached on the 10th January 1866 to Lhasa. This was the first surveyor from Survey of India who reached Lhasa. And the Nain Singh Rawat stayed there for 100 days. He was the person who first time collected the latitude, altitude and the longitude of Lhasa. In July 1866, he returned via Sangpo river, which is Brahmaputra in India, reached the Kailash Panthor region, and finally crossed over Himalayan passes and reached back to Dehradun.
In 1950s, the diaries of Nain Singh were discovered from his descendants by scholars. And one such linguist academic, Dr. Uma Bhatt, worked extensively on them, leading to their publication.
डायरियों की जो भाषा है वो एक प्रकार से मिली जुली भाषा है. उसमें हालांकि हम उसको हिंदी का नाम देते हैं और हिंदी में वो है, देवनागरी में लिखी हुई वो मिली है, लेकिन उसमें अरबी और फारसी और अंग्रेजी के शब्दों का बहुत ज्यादा प्रयोग है, और बल्कि जो उर्दू शैली है उसका भी उसमें प्रयोग किया गया है. और उसके साथ ही कई अंश, कई हिस्से ऐसे हैं जिनमें कि बिल्कुल सहज स्वाभाविक हिंदी बोली गई है. उनकी अपनी भाषा जो थी वो जोहारी थी. जोहारी भाषा पर तिब्बती का बहुत प्रभाव है. और नैन सिंह का जो जिस क्षेत्र में उन्होंने यात्रा की वो क्षेत्र भी तिब्बत था. इसके साथ ही जो कुमाऊं की जो भाषा है उसका भी प्रभाव है. हमने इसको यात्रा साहित्य के अंतर्गत रखा है. हिंदी में भारतेंदु और भारतेंदु से पहले भी यात्रा साहित्य का लेखन शुरू हो चुका था, और भारतेंदु की जिस तरह की स्टाइल है, लिखने की शैली है, लगभग उसी तरह की शैली हमें नैन सिंह की भी मिलती है.
Nain Singh was undoubtedly the superstar. But there were others. Kishan Singh, Mani Singh, Babu Sarachandra Das, as also a few Muslims who were collectively given the generic title of Mirzas and Mullahs. Their missions brought in valuable amount of data. However, all this information was collected clandestinely. It was a form of espionage, and so in true British intelligence tradition, they were never referred to in their records by their real names. Instead, they were assigned code names. Just as in the book, Kipling refers to Harichandra Mukherjee by his code name R17.
Like Nansing, he was given the chief Pandit, Pandit number 1. Then Kishan Singh came, the second was Kishan Singh. His name was given as K, and Singh ka S-I-N-G, G was the last word, so G-K. That's Mani Singh, the G-M. The last word first and the first word afterwards. Sarat Chandra Das was either known as Babu or SCD.
That was Charanjit Kaur, retired librarian, Survey of India. Charanjit Kaur also tells me about Kishan Singh's 3 journeys.
The longest journey was from Lahiri to Mongolia. Which you can imagine at that time going to Mongolia, which was absolutely thousands of kilometers away from Leh. And then through Tibetan territory, Chinese territory. Mongolian people are very rough sort of people and they are headhunters sort of thing. But when Kishan Singh went there, he found that they were very hospitable people. And they welcomed the caravans, gave them food, gave them tea and all that. That was very, very interesting to learn about it.
Besides the Pundits and the Mullahs, an unusual name kept cropping up in different mouths. Kinthup, with an unusual story, which unfolded at a film screening by the Survey of India at the Pandit Nansing Auditorium.
One of the great mysteries of the northeast of India had been the source of the mighty river Brahmaputra. It had for long been speculated that the river Sangpo in Tibet was its source. In 1880, Captain Harmon of the survey chose a Lama to go on this mission. Kinthup was attached to the Lama as assistant. Unfortunately, the Lama lost interest in the mission as soon as he was out of India. He sold off Kinthup as a slave to a village headman and disappeared himself. Though Kinthup decided to complete the job his master had been assigned. He sent a message to Captain Harmon that he would send the logs down the river on a fixed day. He set about collecting 500 logs and threw them into the river at the rate of 50 logs a day for 10 days. Kinthup managed to return home to India, only to discover that his message never reached Harmon, and the logs flowed into the sea unidentified. 3 decades later, when a British officer by the name of Colonel Bailey travelled through the same region, he found tremendous correspondence between what he came across and the details Kinthup had revealed in his logbooks. Bailey tried to convince the British government about Kinthup's work, but couldn't get them to recognize it. He managed to get a lump sum cash award, but by now an impoverished Kinthup was working as a tailor. Kinthup got the award, but died soon after.
आदरणीय बुजुर्गों एवं साथियों, जैसा कि आप सभी को पता है कि आज हमारे महानतम पुरुष पंडित नैनसिंह राव जी के
We step out of Pandit Nansing Auditorium straight into the middle of a celebration.
We have common forefathers.
It is the 21st of October 2017. Like every year, clansmen of Nansing and Kishan Singh have converged at the Survey of India campus in Dehradun to observe Nansingh's 187th birth anniversary. As the clock chimed, the oldest in India, next in age to the Big Ben, I wondered, standing next to the busts of the Pundits, what was their reward? The Dehradun-based Brigadier Krishan Gopal Behel The former Deputy Surveyor General seemed satisfied with the accolades bestowed on the Pundits by their imperialist bosses.
You see, when they came back, people honored them. They were made members of the Royal Geographical Society members. They were given some awards, some watches, some other things. Some land was given to them, and they felt, yes, we have been looked after. After our hard work, people are there to look after.
The present-day kith and kin of the heroes are far from happy. Surinder Singh Pangte, retired IAS officer and a clansman of Nain Singh Pandit, was very forthright.
The work done by these two brothers, they were of such caliber, even the British or certain Europeans could not achieve so much. This award given to him as companion of Indian Empire was opposed by some of the British officers. The record says so. Of course, it is also true. Other British officers, they supported him greatly, and they compared them with the Britishers. They are as good as Britishers, even though they were much less educated, even though they had very little exposure to modern science. Even then they performed so well.
Sir Henry Yule was an Orientalist, and in the year 1877 was the Vice President of the Royal Geographic Society. He was a great admirer of Nain Singh's work, thought of lobbying for a more prestigious honour for Nain Singh rather than mere tokenism.
It is my strong opinion that the great merits of Nain Singh, the Pandit of Pundits, cannot be fully recognized by anything short of one of the Royal Geographic Society's gold medals. Either of his great journeys in Tibet would have brought this reward to any European explorer. To have made two such journeys, adding so enormously to accurate knowledge, is what no European but the first rank of travellers like Livingstone or Grant have done.
I'm back home in Darjeeling, far away from that little space in the Survey of India grounds. I look out over the rooftops with new eyes. Somewhere beyond the new high-rises is an old house that Rajat Banerjee had passionately mentioned to me during our train journey together.
As I started traveling more and going to the Himalayas, I started reading up a bit, and that's where I came across the Pundits and got very interested in them. I've done a fair amount of reading about Pandit Sarat Chandra Das. I was very keen to see his place, Lhasa Villa. So I was kind of trying to trace out this particular place. But thereafter, no one seemed to know what Lhasa Villa was. And I found the actual Lhasa Villa, which was a terrible disappointment because it was a small little cabin. It was not really a cottage or a villa, slightly elongated. And it had two multi-storied buildings coming up on either side, All they knew was some foreigners come and they take photographs out. It's part of Darjeeling's heritage and something that Darjeeling should be proud of.
Rajat Banerjee's words on Babu Sarat Chandra Das's house, Lhasa Villa, in Darjeeling, resounds as a metaphor of the great letdown of the great players of that great game.
Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme